1987. Alan and Debbie Tallman brought home a bunk bed they had purchased at a second-hand furniture shop.
Get that, partner?
They assembled the bed and stored it in their basement.
That's right, didn't we? Now look at...
When the bunk bed was moved upstairs, it marked the beginning of 9 months of horror for the Tallmans. From the moment the bed was first slept in, the house appeared to be haunted by spirits that terrorized first the children, then the entire family.
You're getting so big for Daddy.
I was afraid for my life. I also was very afraid for my family. I had visions of coming home from work and actually seeing my family destroyed, brutally murdered or just laying there dead.
The house where the Tallmans lived had no known history of hauntings, and the Tallmans had never in their lives given ghosts a second thought. They are regular churchgoers. Debbie is a housewife and mother, and Alan is shift supervisor in a manufacturing plant. They are credible and responsible citizens, but their paranormal experiences have left them deeply scarred. They ask that actors portray them in this story, and that their children's real names not be used. The Tallmans feel they were in a battle with forces they do not understand, a battle they were destined to lose. Horicon, Wisconsin is a small farming town of 3,800 people. It is a safe and prosperous place, hardly the spot one would expect to have a terrifying encounter with the supernatural. All the scenes that we recreated were filmed in this house, the very place where the Tallmans had their uncanny meeting with the world of spirits. The Tallman family moved into the house on April 13th, 1986.
Well, yeah, it was our dream house because, it was something that we figured we were going to be there for a long time, and it was a dream house.
Are you feeling any better?
Within weeks, the Tallman children, who had rarely been sick, began to fall ill.
Can you just put that in there just a little bit longer, honey?
After we moved into the house, it seemed like our children were sick all the time. We had them into the doctor's office. Sometimes I would have all three of them in a week.
In late May of 1987, Debbie and Alan moved the bunk bed they had bought upstairs. That night, the Tallman's son Danny was sleeping in the room next door to the bunk bed.
Okay? Good. Have a good night.
Okay.
The bedrooms had been rearranged, and Danny had inherited his parents' old clock radio. On this night, the radio seemed to take on a life of its own.
My son, he came running out in the living room, and he says, "But Mom and Dad," he says, "I seen it, the dial moved." He said the indicator went from one side to the radio to the other. And we kind of looked at each other and says, "Well, if you're going to have a fit with the radio and cause this kind of ruckus, we'll just take the radio out, because that stuff just does not happen."
A few weeks later, Alan Tallman himself had an experience he could not explain. He was busy painting the walls in his basement, but decided to take a break.
My wife called me up for dinner, so I just laid the brush, and I was going to return after I ate my lunch. And after dinner time was over, I went downstairs, down cellar. And the brush was in the paint pail with the bristles sticking up right in the paint pail. I figured there was something strange why this happened, why the brush got into the paint pail, but I wouldn't accept that my house was haunted.
With eyes.
The Tallman's 2-year-old daughter was sleeping in the bunk bed. She began to see things in her room.
At one time, my daughter had talked about a witch behind her door, and the fire. A lot of it was fire, and we had never mentioned it to our son at all. And then I'd say probably about a month later, he had said, "Mom, I saw an old lady standing by my door." And he said that she glowed like fire. At this point, I began to think that our house was probably haunted.
Sit down. Let's talk about this out here.
The Tallmans were desperate. They turned to their family pastor. He felt the presence of evil in the house and thought they might be the victims of the devil.
I'd known them about a year and a half when they called me to come and visit with them about what was going on in the house.
Is this normal?
I believe that my initial analysis of the entity being in the spiritual realm, the occult realm, the demonic, if you will, was accurate. And I still believe it's accurate.
The Tallmans claim they never had a moment's peace. Doors banged open and shut. Strange voices called to them.
Mom?
The visions persisted. The children were terrorized.
Mom! I don't want...
The week before Christmas, Danny once again saw something that horrified him.
It's okay. Nobody's here. You're okay.
I've done everything that I can.
Alan had reached his breaking point. He totally lost control and challenged the entity.
I was like a wild man running around in my house, and I couldn't get no control over it.
Come on there, show yourself to me!
I started yelling on the top of my voice. I said, "What's ever in our house, would you please leave my children alone? And if you want to fight, fight with me."
3 weeks later, on January the 7th, Alan Tallman returned home from working the late shift around 2 a.m. Outside the garage, he heard an eerie, howling sound. He went to investigate.
It started out real soft and then it got real loud. It was a real strong howling of wind, but it was quiet outside. And a voice came out of the howling and it says, "Come here." I ran around the sides of the house looking to see if anybody was there, and I couldn't see nothing. So I went back to the house steps, and the vacuum of the wind started up again. It started out real soft and it got real loud. And the voice said, "Come here," and it just kept on saying, "Come here, come here." And I focused onto the garage door, and I seen a glow. And I run. I got scared and I ran. And I ran to the house and I opened the door and I set my lunch pail on the floor. I locked the door and I stood there for a brief couple of seconds. And I says, "Oh my God, my garage is on fire." And I ran back out on the porch and I looked towards the garage and there was nothing. The garage was just as normal as when I came home from work. So I quick went back in the house and I closed the door and deadbolted the door and locked the door. After I had the door locked, I reached down to pick up my lunch pail, and this thing hurtled it right through the living room.
He came home that night and he was just running around the room. I mean, literally running. He ran in the bedroom, ran around the bed, ran over to the dresser, threw his keys up on the dresser. I've never seen him like that before.
Alan Tallman began sleeping on the floor of his daughter's room each night. The girls were traumatized and needed help falling asleep.
I started to see this fog starting to appear on the floor, and a voice came out of it, and it says, "You're dead."
When he came out of the bedroom, he wouldn't talk to me. His lips were blue. He was so white, you know. I tried to get him to tell me what happened, but all he did was stand there, and tears were running out of his eyes. And so I went to the phone and I called the pastor and I said, "You've got to come over here." I said, "Something happened and Alan's crying." I said, "And he won't tell me what happened."
When I arrived, Alan was very frightened. He was shaking. He was visibly shaken at what he had seen. Alan gave me no indication at all that he was in any way fabricating what he was telling me. And my sense of that was heightened by the fact that I'd been with people before who had described things similar to what Alan was describing. And his fear and terror at what he had seen was very similar to what I had seen before.
A few days later, Alan was working late. He asked a relative of his to watch over the two girls until they fell asleep. Alan's relative was a complete skeptic. That night, he changed his mind. The same specter appeared.
What is it?
The relative came out of the bedroom and I said, "What happened?" And he was scared. I said, "Where's the baby?" He goes, "Back in the bedroom." I said, "Get her." I said, "We are leaving this house." I said, "I am never coming back to this house." I said, "I don't care." I said, "I have had it. I can't handle this no more."
That night, Debbie fled from the house she had thought would be her dream home.
Hurry up!
Hurry! 2 weeks after they fled their home, Alan and Debbie Tallman had the bunk bed destroyed.
After we left the house, everybody asked us, "Can this follow you?" I never thought it could happen the first time. So I don't know if this is the end of the story.
Tallmans have moved to another city now, and so far they've experienced no paranormal phenomena. A new family moved into the Tallmans house last April, and they've had no problems. Perhaps in the world of spirits, as well as in the world of human beings, it is possible simply to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I've been here in this camp for several days. We're told it's Bigfoot country. From this camp, a vast wilderness area is now being searched for the Bigfoot. This is Ron Olson. Ron's from Springfield, Oregon, and he heads up expeditions looking for the Bigfoot. Ron, tell me, just what is a Bigfoot?
Excuse me a minute. Craig, hold that thing up a minute. Bigfoot, or Sasquatch as he's called in Canada, is a giant, hair-covered, human-like creature that's been reported more and more throughout the mountains of the northwestern United States and Canada.
How big do they run?
Many sightings has revealed this creature to be between 7 to 9 feet tall and 600 to 900 pounds.
Well, now, let's hear the words of some people who have had some first-hand experiences with Bigfoot.
In 1924, Fred Beck and 4 other miners were in a cabin in the backwoods located in Washington State near St. Helens. There were 4 or 5 creatures who approached the cabin during the night and proceeded to harass the miners.
No, they was big shoulders and small hips and hairy. And they was, I'd call them a black turned brown by the sun, outside hair. That's what I would call them to be. And muscular. And they looked like they was about 8, 9 foot tall. I've no way to tell.
Another miner and prospector, Albert Ostman, in 1924 was camped near Toba Inlet in British Columbia. While asleep in a sleeping bag, he was picked up and packed several miles. Daylight found him in a small valley encircled by cliffs. This was home for a family of these creatures. He was able to escape after 6 days by getting them sick on a box of snuff. Now let's listen to Mr. Ostman's experience.
Well, there was 4 of them, and none of them look alike. There was what I call the old man, because I had no scale or any rules for measurement, but he was at least 8 feet tall, and must have weighed at least 800 pounds. But what I call the old lady, she couldn't have been over about 600-700 pounds. She was probably 7 feet tall, and they were all covered with hair.
By 1956, there had been several such reported sightings, which had been reported in small local newspapers. Mr. John Green, publisher of a newspaper at Harrison Hot Springs, British Columbia, began investigating some of these sightings. Here is John Green to report on a sighting he investigated in 1957.
When I first came here in about 1957, it was still pretty well open. But all this has grown up since then. Now, what happened at that time was that Mrs. George Chapman, who lived in a house down by the river behind me here, she was in the house and her children were outside. One of them came in and told her that there was a cow coming out of the woods. So she looked out and she saw this man-like thing, but about 8 feet tall and completely covered with hair like a bear. And she knew it to be a Sasquatch. This was, quite a well-known thing to the Indian people. And she was frightened, so she took the children, ran down to the river, and then through the graveyard, which is right behind me here, and came out just about here onto the track, and then ran on down to Ruby Creek. Now, she'd really only had one quick look at the thing, so it wouldn't be that convincing a story, except that a lot of people immediately went back there and saw these enormous tracks. Mr. Tifting, of course, was one of them, and can describe just what the tracks were like and what they did.
Well, he came through the bush into the shed, or the lean-to of the house, and there was a barrel of dried fish with smoked salmon rather. And he broke the barrel, and there was some fish eaten there and thrown around. And then he went down the river bank and apparently took a drink, and then come back up on the other side of the house, through the garden patch, and up to CPR fence, and stepped with 1 foot on that side of the fence and 1 foot on this side of the fence. I can walk right over it. And the footprints was about 18 inches, like. And then he went across there and over to the next fence there and went right up the hillside. And that's as far as we could follow it.
As John Green and others began to seriously investigate reported sightings, they found that many aspects of the sightings were the same. One of the first detailed drawings of a Sasquatch was made by Mrs. Myrtle Walton of British Columbia. Her father, William Rowe, had the unique experience of being able to watch a Sasquatch at close range. Mrs. Walton now tells us how it came about.
My dad come and asked me to draw a picture of this animal or human for him. He called it a Sasquatch, so he could send it to this John Green, and I drawed the picture for him, and just exactly the way he told me he wanted it drawn. There was a few things he changed on it, like he made the arms a lot heavier, and the head was different, and the breast was different, and the back part was different. So between the two of us, we patched it all up, and we sent it to John Green.
As the interested investigators became better known, there were more and more sightings and evidences being submitted to them. Mr. Richard Grover, another investigator, reports on a sighting in a residential area just outside of Tacoma, Washington.
This is the site of the Fife Heights incident. One morning, approximately 4 o'clock, Dick Hancock and his friend came along this road, stopping the car right here when they saw a huge creature behind that sign over there. It was so tall, its head was above the street sign. The creature took approximately 3 steps, crossing the road. It was blinded by the headlights, and it almost bumped into this sign. As it sidestepped, it caught this sign before it went down over the hill. This is the sign that the creature struck, and it bent it like this, leaving these indentations or scratch marks. It has been estimated by experts that it took 500 foot-pounds to bend this material.
A few years after Mrs. Walton made the sketch for her father, she and her husband had a personal experience with a Bigfoot. This is what they report.
Well, I think my wife and I have heard the Sasquatch. There's a swamp fairly close to the house here where we can walk out of an evening, and quite often we go down to watch moose. And one night we were down there, and there wasn't any moose around, which was strange because in the summer every night there's moose in the swamp. And it was just before dusk when across the swamp we heard this screaming cry.
There were 3 cries, screams, or horrible screams, or whatever they was. One after the other. There was silence between, and everything was just dead quiet afterwards. Just made the hair crawl on the back of your neck.
We didn't see anything, but I've heard every animal that lives in the locality at different times, and it wasn't any of those. And if I was asked to describe the sound, I'd say it was a kind of a screaming cry, and it seemed to have anguish in it. Anguish was the thing that stuck with me.
Here is an approximation to the sound that they reported hearing that evening.
There is a vast area, natural forests that people have never seen before. And our elders have told us that there were beings that lived in the woods. Today we hear the word Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but in our Cherokee history, in our culture, we call them Uni Udawihi, the mythical or the secluded tribe. Now, from the cultural aspect of it, these creatures were put here by our creator, Unetlana, and these beings were put here to help us. On our villages in ancient times, we had boundaries where we hunted and gathered, and we would present berries and edible roots at the edge of our boundaries as an offering to these creatures. And in return, these creatures would help us and protect us during our times of hunting and gathering. These beings existed a long time ago, and they do exist today. They're just not talked about as much. And some people get glimpses every now and then.
recent motion picture has mystified and frightened thousands of moviegoers. Most people think the Amityville Horror is a good, scary ghost story. What is not commonly known is that the film is actually based on fact. It's a true story. Was there an evil presence living inside this house? The House of Horrors is in Amityville, Long Island, an unlikely target for an evil curse. Amityville is a pleasant New York suburb. The name Amityville means town of friendship. The house that was for sale at 112 Ocean Avenue was a dream turned into reality for the family of George and Kathy Lutz.
I described the house as charming the first time I saw it, because that's what I thought of it.
You know, I was saying, Kathy, do you believe this? And she said, no, I don't believe this. You know, it's a lovely house. We don't feel there's anything wrong with the house. The house is it's a happy house. It's a house to have a good time in, to have parties in.
Everyone in the area knew that the year before, a family of 6 had been murdered here, so no one wanted to buy the house. The price was very reasonable. George and Kathy decided to ignore superstition and buy it. They settled into their new home just before Christmas. As is common with many Catholic families, Mrs. Lutz asked her parish priest to stop by and bless the house. This blessing began in the sewing room and seemed to set off a chain reaction which would jeopardize the lives of everyone involved. Because of criticism later leveled by other church officials, the priest has never before talked to anyone in the media. In Search Of was able to locate him, and he agreed to tell us his story, but only if he could remain anonymous.
I was blessing the sewing room. It was cold. It was really cold in there. And I thought, gee, this is peculiar. Because it was a lovely day out, and it was winter, yes, but it didn't account for that kind of coldness. I also sprinkling holy water, and I heard a rather deep voice behind me say, "Get out." It seemed so directed toward me that I was really quite startled. I felt a slap at one point on the face. I felt somebody slap me, and there was nobody there.
Later, George and Kathy couldn't believe that flies could be swarming in the dead of winter. Then they puzzled over a toilet that, when flushed, these and other events began to unnerve them. Strange events also affected the priest who blessed the house. He discovered blisters were festering on his hands.
I went to the doctor for it, yes, and he couldn't explain it. He thought it might be caused by anxiety, and of course that's feasible. But I don't think I'm given over to psychosomatic responses.
He called the Lutzes to warn George and Kathy. Noise interference prevented any communication.
Kathy?
He could never get through.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, what's up with you?
Hello.
Unexplained phenomena in the house increased.
Each room had its own
personality.
Own thing, yeah. in time, you couldn't deny that something was very wrong because too many things didn't add up.
Frightening spirits seemed to inhabit the whole house. Kathy felt compelled to talk to the priest. She wanted him to come back and bless the house again. Further attempts to communicate with the priest, however, seemed to be sabotaged.
Father, are you there?
Hello? Hello? A faulty phone connection? Perhaps. For almost a month, George Lutz was attacked by a sensation of intense cold. For days on end, he would neglect his work and his appearance, constantly stoking a fire that never warmed him enough. His personality began to come apart, bringing emotional surges.
Confusion, anger misplaced because I would direct it at Kathy for no reason. Moodiness. I lost 20, 25 pounds there easily during that 28 days. I didn't eat. I didn't go to the office. My values were such that the only thing important was to keep warm and keep a fire going. Everything was very erratic. Our own behavior was erratic.
George still believed he could take things in hand and cope with the unknown horror.
As I do know, when I met George in the first place...
Jay Anson is author of the book, The Amityville Horror.
He's an ex-Marine, built like a bull, and he's the type of guy who can handle any situation with his fists. He literally can. So that when he was approached with this kind of phenomena, he had no idea what he was coping with. None at all. He didn't even know the meaning of the terms in phenomena.
A new problem plagued the Lutzes. The son of the previous owners had shot 6 members of his family while they slept in this very house. George and Kathy now were experiencing vivid nightmares in which they relived the murders as though they were the victims. Difficult as it was, the family tried to maintain a normal existence. But each day, something else, strange and frightening, would be discovered.
One particular afternoon, I was going about the house rearranging furniture and setting up some storage. I went down to the basement. I went over to one bookcase, which was on the end, and I moved it. And much to my surprise, there was no wall behind it. It was the entrance into this small, brightly painted red room. And I was really surprised and alarmed by the find.
The most impressive thing was when we took Harry around. He would not go anywhere near it. He backed right out of there and ran up the steps.
This red room was not in the original house plans. Why? Who built it? And what possible use could it have?
To this day, these questions have never been answered. George and Kathy could only wonder about the ominous little room. It was just one more aspect of the house they didn't understand.
Smile in 1 second, the next, you better run. Benjamin Hyman Siegel. The people who knew him called him many things: powerhouse, charming, dashing, trigger-happy, killer. The women who knew him called him baby blue eyes, bedroom eyes Benjamin. But nobody called him Bugsy to his face. The nickname Bugsy stuck early. He made a name for himself by being as crazy as a bedbug. The son of Jewish immigrants, he did everything to escape the rat-infested tenements of his childhood. gangs were a quick and perfect fit for Benny. He would grow to be a better killer than he was a businessman. Benjamin caught on quick and was always a member of one gang or another. But when he joined ranks with Meyer Lansky, the Bugs Meyer gang became a very feared name. They made their money on furs, jewelry, and cars, along with strong-arming for many of the businesses around, but mostly for themselves. But when the government handed them prohibition, Bugsy Siegel would just be getting started. Bootlegging, hijacking, and murder, all charges that they would try to get old Benny on, but they never stuck. He would go on to meet Hollywood stars, get tangled up with some deadly women, and really make a name for himself in a place that hadn't been imagined yet, Las Vegas. Benjamin Siegel would quickly move up through the ranks as a gangster, and of course was part of the infamous Murder, Inc. In 1941, Bugsy beat a murder rap, and he wanted to get out of the city, and he looked 300 miles east to a sleepy little town called Las Vegas. They would move their bookmaking racket there, where gambling was legal, and Las Vegas was never the same. There is a rumor that Bugsy Siegel had a vision of Las Vegas before he ever built it. The truth is, it was more of a stolen dream. Bugsy did look out across the desert and envision a casino and showroom and a dazzling mecca for gambling that everybody would want to flock to. However, Billy Wilkerson had already started building the Flamingo. His idea of a glamorous complex where gambling was free and debauchery was on the menu as well was his dream. But he was a gambler, and like most gamblers, he lost control, and he lost the money that it would have taken to finish building his dream. In walked Bugsy Siegel. Bugsy had a lot of dreams and a lot of backing from a lot of dangerous men. And his first night the Flamingo opened, it was an absolute flop. He has totally misjudged the people in the area who were used to going in cowboy boots and cowboy hats to gamble on the horse races. And he had built something for a very lavish crowd. It would take a while to catch on. But, of course, Bugsy wasn't going to stay out of trouble that long. As well as having a wife and children at home, keeping with the gangster mobster lifestyle of pretending that you're one thing when you're really a crime mobster behind the whole scene, he got mixed up with Virginia Hill, who really pushed all of his buttons. A very volatile relationship. She would just look at Bugsy and tell him that somebody was giving her a hard time, and Bugsy would start chasing with a gun, shooting at his feet. He made a lot of promises he couldn't keep. They were very expensive promises. He lost a lot of money, overspent on the reconstruction, had to pay back double to the mobsters, and he kept making all these promises. Siegel got way in over his head, and the investors were mad. And since those investors were very dangerous men, his buddy Lansky sent him many warnings, and Bugsy ignored them. Virginia Hill took off on a plane, probably warned by the mob, and on June 20th, 1947, after hanging out with his friend and actor George Raft, Bugsy Siegel was sitting on the couch reading the LA Times, and at 10:30 p.m., 9 shots rang out through the window. 2 of them caught Benjamin Siegel in his head. Never in life to see his vision, but perhaps in death he had another chance.
Near Innsbruck stands a monument to perversity. Castle Ambras, occupied during the 16th century by Archduke Ferdinand, harbors one of the most terrifying portrait galleries in the civilized world. Painted from life, these grotesqueries reflect the offbeat tastes of the collector. In this gallery of the bizarre are images of those maimed in battle or deformed by nature. One portrait seems curiously out of place. It's that of a king who ruled not in Austria, but in a land to the east, now called Romania. His brutality earned him the nickname Vlad the Impaler. His real name was Vlad Dracula. Centuries later, Dracula's name and the land he lived in would be used to create a character so unredeemed by human qualities that we still recoil in fascination at his fiendish exploits. Fiction or reality? A search for the truth behind the legend. Horror has a special fascination for many, and filmmakers have done their best to exploit that fascination. Audiences have come to know Dracula well. They've seen him portrayed on the screen for more than 50 years. There's the black cape, the jutting canine teeth, the demonic eyes and nocturnal lust for blood. But what of the truth behind the legend? Romania is a land rich in romantic folklore and legends. The tale of the evil Count Dracula is not one of them. The rugged mountains and hidden valleys breed their own mythology. Called Romania's Olympus, Mount Ceflau rises nearly 6,000 feet in the Carpathian Mountains. In pre-Christian times, it was believed to be the home of the gods. Each year, even now, on the first Sunday of August, a pagan ritual is reenacted. Thousands gather by torchlight on Ceflau's shadowy summit to celebrate friendship and love and the renewal of life. During the rest of the year, Ceflau yields its mysteries to few men. Dr. George Iacome is a surgeon who climbs mainly for adventure. The other, a shepherd, who has spent a lifetime in these alpine meadows. Both know the mountain and its hidden places. Both respect its awesome symbolic power. Though one is a simple peasant, the other a man of science, the mountain has given them a strong bond of friendship. They exchange stories of ancient superstitions of dark, frightening corners where no one has yet ventured. The music seems to recall a distant time in these mountains when ghosts inhabited Ceflau. Legends tell of a 15th century nobleman named Budu who loved the king's daughter, Anna. When he was killed in battle, the grief-stricken Anna asked the powerful witch to bring her lover back from the dead. The witch raised Budu from his grave, but as a ghost. While passing over Ceflau, Budu's ghost was struck by the rising sun, turning him into rock. Till this day, on Ceflau's brooding summit, there is a stone megalith known as Budu's Tower. In the nightmare world of superstition and fear, it often becomes difficult to separate fact from fiction. The familiar story of Dracula is a case in point. Since its publication in 1897, Bram Stoker's classic novel of Gothic horror has been read or performed almost continuously. Yet few are aware that the character was based on a real prince of darkness, whose deeds are perhaps more shocking and more terrifying than those of the fictional vampire. Transylvania, stronghold of legend, a place dimly recalled from horror movies as a dark, forbidding region cloaked in superstition and terror. Here, according to popular myth, live the undead, the dreaded vampires who thrive on human blood. Dracula, written by Bram Stoker, perpetuated one myth that has endured for nearly a century. Along Transylvania's southern perimeter stands Castle Braun. In appearance, it corresponds to the castle described in the novel as the home of the bloodthirsty Count. Haunted by his own childhood visions of threatening forests and spooky castles, Bram Stoker created an eerie world that became more than just a horrifying journey into the supernatural. It was also a parable of Victorian repression. Locked inside Castle Dracula's dark walls were hidden passions and secret longings, which erupted into violence and terror. German film classic Nosferatu comes closer to capturing the mood of the original novel than the later interpretation of Bela Lugosi. In the book, the hero Jonathan Harker describes his first encounter with Dracula. Holding out his hand, he grasped mine with a strength which made me wince, an effect which was not lessened by the fact that it seemed as cold as ice. Taking Transylvania, a remote place he'd heard of but never seen, as his setting, Stoker evoked chilling images of the living dead. Under the shroud of darkness, the fiendish apparition risen from its coffin begins to stalk its human prey. The nightmare becomes reality. The unknown clutches at our throats. The shrieking of the vampire bat evokes the horror of Dracula. Night-flying hunters, they prey mainly on cattle. But one strange fact stands out. The vampire bat is found only in Mexico and South America. Modern Romanians stubbornly deny the existence of vampire legends in Transylvanian peasant lore. To them, Dracula is the name of a 15th century tyrant whose story, too, was written in blood. Nicolae Paduraru is an official of the Ministry of Tourism. His search for the historical truths behind the Dracula legends brings him repeatedly to a small island on Lake Snagov, near the capital city of Bucharest. It is on this island that the body of the real Dracula is supposedly buried. Nicolae knows the island's history and its few inhabitants intimately. A product of Romania's socialist present, he is fascinated by his nation's turbulent past.
Părinte!
Nicolae is greeted by the abbot, who shares his interest in the story of the bloody king who bore the name Dracula. For the two men, the old church has become more than a religious shrine and national monument. Its ancient doors are the gateway to a mystery that for centuries has baffled scholars and historians. Superstitious romantics have speculated that any robber entering the church would be met by Dracula's ghost, rising in vengeance from its grave. And this, they say, is why he lies buried just inside the door. A more logical explanation was forwarded by archaeologist Dino Rossetti, who uncovered the burial site in the early 30s. The decapitated body was placed in an unmarked grave to prevent vandalism. Saints and kings have begun to fade silently from Snagov's walls. The monastery enjoyed the protection of Vlad Dracula during the 15th century. But when one of the priests dared challenge the king's decisions, he was put to death, slowly and painfully. The torturous method of execution favored by the king was so barbarous, his own countrymen branded him Vlad the Impaler. In Romanian, Vlad Țepeș. Both men realize that the truth about a man's life is often buried alongside his corpse. That the infamous monarch, whose name symbolizes evil incarnate, might himself have been the victim of propaganda spread by his enemies throughout Europe. Seeking the truth can become an exciting adventure. And so a search begins. It will unravel some of the mysteries which surround the life of a king they called Dracula, son of the devil. Transylvania, the heart of Dracula country. Transylvania spreads across northwestern Romania in an unbroken chain of fertile hills and sunlit valleys. Here, the princes of Wallachia sought refuge from fierce Muslim warriors who burned their villages, raped their land, and punished captives by mercilessly driving stakes through their bodies. From the Turks, a young Wallachian prince named Dracula would learn all about impalement. Like an image from an old fairy tale, the town of Sighișoara slumbers peacefully along the gentle slopes of the Transylvanian highlands. Unchanged since the Middle Ages, Sighișoara was once a bastion of Germanic military might and commercial enterprise. In this house, in 1431, a son was born to the fearsome Prince Vlad Dracul, the Dragon. The boy was called Dracula, son of the dragon. A coin bearing the family emblem is one of the few remaining artifacts from Dracula's reign. The symbol of the dragon reinforced Vlad's image as a fearless Christian crusader. As his notoriety grew, the name Dracula took on new meaning. Dragon would be increasingly interpreted as devil. Vlad belonged to an age of brutality. The Renaissance, which saw the rebirth of art and learning, also bred new tyrannies, unspeakable torture, and oppression. To understand Vlad's cruelty, we must also understand his world. The nunnery at Sucevița was originally a fortified monastery, protected by walls 20 feet high and 10 feet thick. The traditional woodblock, summoning nuns and monks to prayer, may at one time have also been a summons to battle. For the monasteries of Romania were more than strongholds of the Christian faith. They were part of a formidable defense perimeter to ward off invaders. It's likely that the young Dracula looked out from the battlements of such a monastery watching men die in the brutal spectacle of war. Steeped in the teachings of the Eastern Orthodox Church, Vlad Dracula surely must have developed strong, simple notions of good and evil, of reward and retribution. The ladder of virtues, the work of an unknown artist, shows that in the climb toward heaven, few are virtuous enough to reach it. Most topple along the way, headed toward eternal damnation. To a young prince, impressionable and bristling for power, such messages were clear. By punishing evil, salvation could be had. Until the 16th century, Suceava was the capital of the province of Moldavia. Here, Vlad Dracula fled, deposed after briefly assuming the throne of Wallachia at the age of 17. This was the beginning of his second exile. The first time, he'd been sent as a hostage to the Turkish court by his father, a guarantee against war with the Sultan. As Vlad waited in Suceava to take power, he vowed to free Wallachia from Turkish domination and break the power of the nobles and church. In 1456, the second reign of Vlad Dracula began. The greatest threat to his power centered in the German towns of southern Transylvania. Of these, Brasov was the largest. Convinced that her powerful merchants were conspiring with his enemies, furious at their defiance of his trade restrictions, Vlad launched a series of punitive raids against Brasov and neighboring towns, taking a terrible toll of their citizens. How many perished by his command, no one can say. That slow, torturous death by impalement was excessively barbaric, no one can deny. Yet since the only written accounts from that time come from Germany, it's conceivable the atrocity reports were exaggerated. Not so the massacre at Târgoviște, Vlad's capital. During his successful campaign against the Turks, he impaled thousands of enemy soldiers outside the city gates to frighten the invaders. He would be known now for all time as Vlad the Impaler. Viewed through the filter of time, another side to Vlad's character emerges. His bold strategies won the admiration of his Turkish opponents, who also regarded him as just and honest. On the threshold of victory, he was betrayed by his younger brother Radu and forced into political captivity in Hungary. After 12 years, Vlad was restored to the throne by his cousin Stephen the Great. Faces from the present. A few among the 1.5 million who live in Bucharest, Romania's bustling capital. In their city, Vlad the Impaler made his last stand. Not far from the center of Bucharest, with its huge outdoor markets, are archaeological remnants of its past. Layers of history, stripped away, reveal fortifications dating back to the 13th century. Below ground level, there has been unearthed a portion of the original castle built by Vlad Dracula. It was in these haunted surroundings that Dracula planned his last campaign against the Turks. His third and final reign would last only 2 months. On December 14, 1476, he was killed in battle near Bucharest, and according to eyewitnesses, beheaded, perhaps mistakenly, by one of his own troops. Vlad's remains were secretly buried at Snagov. In death's darkness, the prince may finally have found peace. If some light has been shed on the truth during this search for Dracula, it doesn't mean that belief in vampires will be dispelled. Bram Stoker's Dracula will always persist in our minds because in him we have found the perfect symbol for unrepentant evil. Nosferatu, Dracula is destroyed by the daylight, dissolving in a puff of smoke. But many would prefer to feel he can still be found, lurking somewhere in the mist-shrouded mountains of Transylvania. Beneath storybook towers, the old Transylvanian city of Sigashora seems untouched by time. Her people still bear traces of their medieval ancestry, clinging tenaciously to old traditions and religious faith. They are steeped in Sigashora's history, remembering that it once was a stronghold of wealth and power, the home of princes, the birthplace of a king. Vlad Dracula belongs to their heritage, Stoker's vampire to our imaginations. Legends die slowly. The myth of the human being who takes the form of a bat and drinks blood will survive because people choose to believe. Vampires, like werewolves and monsters, serve a purpose. They are representations of our hidden fears. By conquering these nightmare creatures, we purge ourselves of our darkest thoughts, and in so doing, reclaim the human spirit.
This story will chill you. It's about a man driving along a dark and lonely highway. At the side of the road, a person waving at him, warning him to slow down. Topping the very next hill, the driver came across a fatal car smash and would have added to the carnage if he hadn't slowed. Days later, he saw a picture of the man killed in the smash. It was the same man who waved him down. A country road in Victoria, early on a Sunday, May the 12th, 1991. A young man driving home after visiting friends. What happened next still haunts him, an experience he still can't talk about publicly. In fact, he's only ever told a handful of relatives and his close friend Bruce Harrower, who recounted this remarkable story.
There was a look of terror that came over his face as he was describing it. And yeah, I just have no doubts at all that what he saw, he did see.
To help maintain his anonymity, we'll call the driver Tom. He was a local. He knew the road well. But that morning, he did something uncharacteristically foolish.
He was, wanting home to bed. He was very tired at this stage. He put the foot down. He was doing 110 kilometres an hour. The road was only a 60-kilometre zone.
As he sped along, something at the side of the road attracted his attention. Tom glanced out the window of the car and literally could not believe his eyes.
He saw this vision off to the side in the medium strip, and as he glanced at it, he saw what appeared to be a figure, a ghost, a spirit. And the strange thing was, he saw the lamppost directly behind it, through it in fact, and he just couldn't believe what he'd seen. He virtually sort of rubbed his eyes and didn't know whether it was reality or what, just his imagination.
Maybe it was the shock of seeing the vision. Maybe good sense prevailed. But immediately Tom slowed down. Then he turned back to take a second, closer look at the figure he thought he'd seen.
Where he saw the figure the first time, he really had a good look this second time, and sure enough, it was there again. A figure, a spirit.
Confused and dazed, Tom headed once again for home, this time at a much safer speed. As he crested a hill, he suddenly noticed flashing lights up ahead. As he drew closer, he realized it was a road accident, and a very bad one at that. Probably fatal. 2 crumpled vehicles. No sign of survivors. Police were still waiting for the ambulance to arrive, and not surprisingly, they waved Tom on his way.
So without further delay, Tom went on his way and headed home. He didn't get much sleep that night at all. Just his mind was just spinning with the accident. He just couldn't believe it.
For days, the accident played on Tom's mind. So much so that he didn't give the vision he'd seen a second thought. It would come flooding back, though, when he finally received that week's local newspaper. The lead story was a fatal car crash, and inside was a photograph of one of the victims.
Immediately after he glanced at the picture, something was telling his mind that, you've seen this man before somewhere, but at the time he couldn't work out where. His mind was telling him that it was like a puzzle that he was just forced to work out. So he had a good look at the photograph, and he realised where he'd seen this man before. It was actually the figure that he had seen waving him down.
But how could that be? The more Tom thought about it, the more convinced he became that he understood the events of that early morning. He had seen a ghost.
He was precisely heading along the road at 1:15, and that was when he saw the figure. Now, the newspaper states that the man who died, Brian Johnson, died at about 1 o'clock, which would mean that Tom saw the figure 15 minutes after he had died. So this just shocked him even more. He couldn't handle it at this stage, basically.
Tom and his friend Bruce Harrower are also convinced the vision was a warning on a tragic day that probably saved his life.
Tom believes that if he hadn't seen the figure, he would have, travelling at 110 kilometres, going over the last rise, he would have most definitely ploughed into the accident itself and most likely killed himself and innocent bystanders.
A play was written many years ago in memory of a long-dead Egyptian king. 2 young women were chosen to play the leading roles. The play was the whim of an American writer who thought to poke fun at ancient Egyptian superstition. Legend had it that the priests of Egypt cursed their dead king to wander aimlessly through eternity. They did this by forbidding anyone to speak his name.
We call out the name, Akhenaten.
That night, both women had eerie dreams about the cursed king, Akhenaten. One, that she was struck across the face. In the morning, she was nearly blind. Coincidence? Or was there another force involved? A curse working its evil way after nearly 4,000 years. Egypt. It was already a great nation 3,000 years before Christ was born. Its kings built enormous monuments during their lifetimes. By the 20th century, 33 royal tombs had been excavated in the Valley of the Kings. The most exciting discovery, however, was still to come. It would be the culmination of a sequence of events that began not in Egypt, but in the green fields of England. The Berkshire Downs. Highclere Castle is the ancestral home of the Earls of Carnarvon. The lord who presided here in the first quarter of this century would help make history. It would cost him dearly, however. The Earl did not leave the comfort of his castle and embark on the adventurer's trail by choice. A curious chain of events compelled him to go to Egypt. The present Lord Carnarvon remembers very well how it began.
First of all, my father had a serious accident in Germany, a motor accident, and he was rather badly injured. He also suffered from rather weak lungs, so his doctors said to him, doesn't matter where you go, but you must go to a dry, warm climate every year from now on in the winter months. So Papa said to himself, well, that's a fine kettle of fish. He likes shooting and everything else. So he decided that he'd go off at the end of the shooting season, about the beginning of February, and he went to Egypt.
The rhythm of life along the Nile was a radical change for the Earl.
After he'd been there a few months, Lord Como was sent for him and said, my dear Porchy, he said, if you're coming out here regularly, you're going to be so bored you won't know what to do with yourself. So may I make a suggestion? Yes, indeed, I'd be honored if you'd tell me what to do. Right, he said, why don't you take up as a hobby Egyptology? He said, it's very interesting, and what's more, he said, it happens that at this moment of time I've got the very fella who will help you best. He happens to be an awfully nice young man called Howard Carter.
Howard Carter was an intense, driven man. After 15 years with the British Civil Service in Egypt, he'd been fired for refusing to apologize to a superior. Carter stayed on in Egypt because he had a dream. By the time Lord Carnarvon returned to England, he'd agreed to bankroll that dream. 15 years after the bargain was struck, Carter still labored in the Valley of the Kings. His dream? To find the tomb of King Tutankhamun. Professional archaeologists thought the valley had been picked clean years before. Carter disagreed. The search was exasperating. Carnarvon was threatening to cut the money off when in November 1922, Carter unearthed a staircase. At the bottom, a door with royal seals intact. The door had been sealed more than 3,000 years before. Carter couldn't be sure he'd found Tutankhamun's tomb, but whatever lay behind the door was bound to make his years of toil worthwhile.
And at that moment, he got to the stage where he was able to see that there really was the jackpot, the hoped that they'd worked for all those years. They uncovered the steps, the first steps. And at that stage, he thought the only thing to do is to quickly cable to my father, tell him to come out, which he did.
Carter waited patiently for Carnarvon's arrival. Together, they breached the door. "Can you see anything?" Carnarvon asked. Then, slowly, the answer. Yes, wonderful things. Wonderful indeed. Carter's vision and Carnarvon's patience had paid off. Beyond treasure, there was the undisturbed body of a long-dead king, the resting place of Tutankhamun, Pharaoh of Egypt. At last, Carter was face to face with his dream. Around Tutankhamun's neck, a magnificent gold collar. Carter recognized it as the vulture goddess Nekhbet, a warning to intruders. There were reports of another warning on a tablet that has since vanished. Death will slay with his wings whoever disturbs the rest of the Pharaoh. There was little time to worry about curses. Ahead lay the enormous task of cataloging the treasure. Word of the discovery of Tutankhamun's treasure spread quickly. Tourists were becoming a problem. Lord Carnarvon returned to Cairo with part of the treasure. He had no way of knowing it, but he would never see England again. Fever, brought on by an infected mosquito bite, ravaged the Earl's body.
When I arrived, there was my father, pulse beating in his throat. You could see he very bloodshot eyes, obviously frightfully feverish and ill. So I say to the nurse, whatever happens, for heaven's sake, call me.
The young Carnarvon went to his own room as his father fought what was to be the last battle of his life.
Sure as fate, about 5 to 2, the good lady is shaking me awake, and she said, "Your father's drawn his last breath. Please come quickly."
Something was wrong with the lights, and young Carnarvon needed a flashlight to find his way to the Earl's bedside. Officially, the cause of Carnarvon's death would be pneumonia. The Egyptian press had another explanation.
Your father disturbed the remains of King Tutankhamun. He took his revenge, and he was responsible for the whole of the lights in Cairo going out at exactly the moment he died.
Lord Carnarvon was only the first of many who would die shortly after visiting the tomb of Tutankhamun. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was a great event, but the sudden and mysterious death of Lord Carnarvon had cast a pall on the celebration. Carnarvon's grieving son returned to England, only to find new evidence that his father might have unleashed some malevolent force, which cost him his life. Already, the popular press was proclaiming Lord Carnarvon's death to be the revenge of the mummy. His son took refuge behind the walls of Highclere Castle. The memory of that awful night in Cairo would not so easily be shaken.
I had a little fox terrier bitch called Susie. And when I got back, very old-fashioned housekeeper, Mrs. McLean, said to me, "I've something to tell you, my lord, a really extraordinary happening." At 5 minutes to 4, and as you know, Cairo time is 2 hours, so we're 2 hours in front of Cairo, she said, Susie sat up on her hind legs. Her mouth was covered in foam. She let out a howl like a wolf and fell back dead.
Something of a panic set in. Collectors rushed to get rid of whatever Egyptian relics they possessed. Howard Carter's assistant, Richard Bethel, died suddenly of a circulatory collapse. Bethel's father, Lord Westbury, committed suicide. The chief Egyptologist at both Paris's Louvre and New York's Metropolitan Museum died shortly after visiting the tomb. American financier Jay Gould took ill and died within days of seeing Tutankhamun's final resting place. To date, 22 deaths have been associated with the curse. Oxford University became the center for an exhaustive study of the relics removed from Tutankhamun's tomb, and for an investigation of the curse many now believed was real. Oxford's Ashmolean Museum is still one of the richest repositories of Egyptian antiquities. Historian Henry Lincoln is a frequent visitor.
It's very easy with our 20th century skeptical, materialistic minds to dismiss the curse of the pharaohs as absolute rubbish. Well, it is just that, absolute rubbish. Death to anyone who enters this tomb is a pretty fierce curse to somebody with a superstitious mind, but it's just a threat, and a pretty ineffectual one at that. And we all know that the curse of the pharaohs was concocted by the popular press because Lord Carnarvon had sold the rights to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb to the Times, and the other papers wanted something sensational to write about. But to the Egyptians, a curse wasn't rubbish. Tutankhamun's figured largely in the thinking about the curse, and it was Tutankhamun's father-in-law who, in fact, was cursed to wander in all eternity by the priests of Ammon.
The ram's head god, Amun-Ra, was dominant in Egypt before the reign of Akhenaten. Akhenaten introduced the practice of sun worship, symbolized by a new god, Aten. The priests of Amun were stripped of their power. Under this new religion, only the faith directly with Aten. The temples of Amun were defaced, but the priests bided their time. The old religion and the old ways went underground. Egypt's peasants apparently also maintained their loyalty to Amun. Akhenaten died in the 17th year of his reign. His tomb has never been found. Even as the young Tutankhamun was ascending the throne, the priests of Amun moved to regain their power. Akhenaten's name was eradicated from great monuments, his likenesses destroyed.
There was an American artist, Joseph Lyndon Smith, working in the tombs, taking copies of the wall paintings at the time that Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered. He felt it would be a good thing to intercede with the gods on behalf of Akhenaten and to lift the curse of Amun-Ra so that the pharaoh was no longer condemned to wander forever in eternity. He was going to do this by putting on a play.
A ruler is born like the atom and will endure for eternity if only we speak his name. We call out the name Akhenaten. Akhenaten, 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 Akhenaten. We call out the name Akhenaten.
At the final dress rehearsal, something unheard of happened. At the moment when Akhenaton's own prayer was being spoken, a colossal hailstorm began. To the Egyptian helpers who were there for the play, it was as if the gods were throwing stones at them. The rehearsal had to be abandoned. The two women who were playing Akhenaton and his mother, both that night had the same dream. Each dreamt that she was standing in a temple dedicated to Amun-Ra, and the statue of the god came to life and struck them. But for each woman there was one small difference in the dream. One of the women was struck across the stomach and the other across the face. Within 48 hours, the one who had been struck across the body was having a serious abdominal operation, and the one who had been struck across the face had the most virulent case of trachoma ever seen in a European. She almost lost her sight. Everybody associated with that little play within that period of 48 hours had been struck down by some minor illness or other. Was that the curse of the priests of Ammon, still working after all those thousands of years? And if it wasn't the curse, what was it?
A new chapter to the mystery of the mummy's curse opened in 1976 at the Paris airport. The occasion was an eerie state visit. The mummy of King Ramses was arriving with pomp and circumstance due a chief of state. Something terrible was happening to the mummy, and Egypt wanted France to help. The mummy was taken to the Museum of Man in Paris. In a sealed laboratory, Egyptologists gathered. The Ramses mummy was among the most perfectly preserved of all those found in the Valley of the Kings. Now it was beginning to deteriorate rapidly. The Egyptians wanted to know if Ramses could be saved. Tutankhamun's mummy had been ravished by the time of its discovery. Some theorized the priests of Amun deliberately thwarted the embalming procedure. There has been no public announcement to date about what the French experts found when they unwrapped the body of Ramses. The speculation has been that a dangerous bacteria, perhaps dormant for thousands of years, is now alive and at work on the mummy. Egypt's priests knew something of biology. Perhaps they knew more than modern men imagine. In the tomb of Tutankhamun were many wonderful vessels of gold and alabaster. They were apparently designed to hold precious liquids and rare unguents. If they contained something else, something lethal, the secret died with the last priest of Amun-Ra. 1977 affords millions of Americans the opportunity to see Tutankhamun's treasures. They are on special loan from the Egyptian government and will tour museums in Washington, D.C., Chicago, New Orleans, Los Angeles, Seattle, and New York. 55 works of art from what many consider the greatest archaeological find in history. Time has eroded much of the mystery and awe which gripped discoverers Carter and Carnarvon. The curse is probably rubbish after all. Perhaps the priests of Amun-Ra tasted enough vengeance with the deaths of Lord Carnarvon and some of his close associates. After all, Howard Carter lived out a long and happy life, and he was the first to break the seals on Tutankhamun's tomb. If the priests of Amun sought to obliterate the memory of Akhenaten and his heir Tutankhamun, they failed. Their names have been rediscovered and spoken again and again. To a pharaoh, that was assurance of immortality. Life, symbolized by the Ankh. Earrings, probably worn by Tutankhamun as a young boy. The wooden figures are likenesses of favorite slaves, servants for the pharaoh in the afterlife. Other figures guarded the young king's tomb for the 3,000 years he was forgotten. If we believe the curse, we must believe something else. We must believe that in the end, Tutankhamun triumphed over the priests of Amun.
England's glorious history has been steeped in ambition, greed, treachery, and betrayal. Its castle walls have witnessed centuries of bloodshed. The anguished wails of the forlorn still echo through the corridors. Cut off by tragic death, these restless spirits have been trapped in limbo between heaven and hell. They have become the castle ghosts of England. Do you believe in ghosts? I do. Ever since at the age of 6, I ran panting downstairs and said there was a grey lady standing silent outside my bedroom door. I'm not alone. 40% of the English believe in ghosts, and 1 in 7 people claims to have seen one. Spirits continue to haunt us from the dim recesses of a darker history. Manifestations of the paranormal have many names in Britain. Wraiths, spunkies, chagrins, church grims, hags of the dribble. From the ancient Druids to Dickens' A Christmas Carol, spirits have been a palpable presence in the English landscape. On the west coast of England's remote Cumbrian region stands Manchester Castle, where 2 bloody murders triggered a series of strange events that cannot be explained. This rugged and beautiful landscape has echoed to the gruesome cries of the inhabitants of Manchester Castle. Its walls loom over the treacherous quicksands of the River Esk in the valley below. Today the castle is plagued by eerie hauntings, odd happenings, and disturbing manifestations. The present owner of the castle is Patrick Gordon Duff Pennington. There have been Penningtons here in this castle, I know, since the early 13th century. Do you think that the spirits, the manifestations, the spectres, give the family special attention?
I don't know. I like to think that they feel that we belong, and we like to feel that we belong to them a bit.
What kind of hauntings have people experienced here?
Sometimes when I open the doors and open the shutters in the mornings, people pull the doors out of my hand. The last curator, he used to see a grey lady walking up and down the red passage outside our room. The tapestry room, people have slept in there and have asked to be moved. They hear people cry when they feel cold. They think it's a nasty place to be in, and the people who feel anything at all, they come out not quite the same as they went in.
Residents and guests of the castle also report the distinct sound of thumping on the stairs. Evidence of paranormal occurrences was so strong at Manchester Castle that the family called in a team of specialists to investigate. On September the 18th, 1993, the experts set up an array of monitoring equipment for a scientific study of the hauntings. They waited for nightfall. At 10:40 p.m., the investigators felt the temperature drop dramatically. A minute later, a vase began shaking. Then a loud thud was heard, followed by 3 raps. The investigators noticed a movement past the door. The team observed so many unexplained events that they reported it is hard to come to any conclusion other than that Manchester Castle is inhabited by supernatural energies. Not a few of the supernatural happenings have been attributed to a malevolent spirit that inhabits the castle. And in Manchester's long story, there's no more malevolent character to judge by events than Thomas Skelton. He was the last jester or fool to the Penningtons. He was known as Tom Fool and was responsible for the phrase tomfoolery. He was also a steward of the estate. He was a trusted servant of his masters and a tyrant to those beneath him. He's said to have known Shakespeare, indeed, to have been the model for King Lear's fool. Malicious, vicious, witty, and cruel. No one could play a trick more thoroughly than Tom Skelton. He loved to sit under a chestnut tree near the castle and wait for passers-by seeking directions. Those he didn't like, he'd send to their deaths in the quicksands below. In 1585, a scandal broke around the daughter of the castle lord. Hellwise Pennington earned her name as a fiery, passionate and fatally headstrong young lady. Although betrothed to the son of a powerful neighbouring family, Hellwise fell in love with the village carpenter. But their encounters were not to remain secret. When word reached Hellwise's father, Sir William, he sought out Tom Skelton, meeting him here under what became known as Thomas's tree. He told him to put an end to the scandalous affair. Skelton summoned the carpenter to the castle under the pretence that he was to meet his beloved Hellwise. Once there, he plied the carpenter with cider until he was drunk and insensible. Then Skelton used the carpenter's own tools, a mallet and broad chisel, to hack off the young man's head. He was heard to say, "When the lazy dolt wakes up, he'll have trouble finding his head." Always one to please his master, Skelton presented Hellwise's father with the young carpenter's head. History does not record Sir William's reaction.
I thought it was rather silly, the story, but then, when we'd been here a little while, we used to work terribly hard, started in the office at 6 in the morning, and after tea, I would walk across the hall sometimes, and there were footsteps used to follow me.
You don't think it could possibly have been an echo?
No, I've tried that out. No, it wasn't. And I've tried it with sort of shoes that didn't make a noise, but I always heard the behind me.
The thumping heard in the hallways could well be the sound of Skelton dragging the young carpenter's body through the castle. And the mournful crying? Could it be Hellwise weeping over her murdered lover? Afterwards, the heartbroken Hellwise disappeared into a nunnery and eventually went mad. As for Thomas Skelton, he never paid for his crime, but fate has a way of meting out justice. He drowned in the River Esk. Is Manchester still haunted by the presence of Tom Fool, waiting to play one last trick? "200 years later, these dark waters were to claim more lives and give rise to another apparition. One that prefers this road leading to Manchester Castle.
Good morning.
Grace Simmons, an employee of the castle, has seen the ghost.
It'll be about October in 1985 that I've been out for a night and coming back up the road, driving up the road with my husband, and just come around the corner and I saw this lady standing. She was leaning against the wall. And she seemed in distress, so I said to my husband, would you stop and I'll get out the car and go back and make sure she's all right. And yeah, we went back. When I got back to the corner, she'd gone.
The woman in white began appearing after a gruesome murder in 1822. Love seems to be ill-fated at Manchester Castle. Mary Bragg, a servant in a nearby village, was madly in love with the castle's steward, but the housekeeper, a Miss Littledell, had taken a fancy to the same man. One night her jealousy turned to rage. Two ruffians appeared at Mary's door. Concocting a lie, they claimed her beloved had fallen ill and she must rush to him. Alarmed, Mary went with the two men. She never made it to her lover's side. Near a tree on the road through Manchester Wood, the abductors pulled Mary Bragg from the carriage. A pistol was rammed into her mouth. But poor Mary's body had more indignities to suffer. To get rid of it, the murderers left it in a field for the castle dogs to devour. When that failed, they tried to find a hiding place. They hoped the waters of the River Esk would do their dirty work. But Mary Bragg's body refused to stay hidden. Months later, it was found washed up, further downriver, badly decomposed. At the coroner's inquest, a doctor claimed it was impossible to determine the cause of death. Some say he'd been bribed to cover up the murder. But those involved with Mary Bragg's murder did not escape their fates. They met with bizarre ends. One of her assassins went insane, another was hanged as a highway robber. Mary's rival, Miss Littledale, who had hired the killers, became the subject of rumor and suspicion. Eventually, she was banished to a remote village where she was shunned as a murderess. The doctor at the inquest drowned in the River Esk, not 100 yards from where Mary's body had been dumped. In 1993, the tree under which Mary Bragg died was cut down. The timber was reputed to be cursed. Blood began to ooze from the cut logs. No one locally would have anything to do with the wood. It had to be shipped to London to be sold. The apparition of the woman in a long white dress was seen on the very spot where the tree stood. Brutally murdered and mistreated in death, could it be that Mary Bragg still wanders in search of justice? Feels very calm.
Ah, but this is where most of the castle hauntings are taking place.
Can you account for that?
Well, I put it down to our Katie.
Who's Katie?
Queen Catherine Parr.
And this is her. Catherine Parr was a striking figure. Nearly 6 feet tall, with auburn hair. She was intelligent and artistic, a lover of music and poetry. She is famous for being Henry VIII's 6th and last wife. Catherine Parr managed to keep her head and outlive him. Catherine always had a passion for this man, Thomas Seymour. He was handsome, selfish, a buccaneer, a political adventurer. He was determined to be near the crown. After Henry VIII died in 1547, Seymour proposed to his daughter, Princess Elizabeth. When she refused, he turned to the king's widow, Catherine. They were married later the same year and came to live here at Sudeley. Within months, Catherine was pregnant. At the age of 35, it must have seemed a miracle, and everyone in the castle prepared for the birth with excitement and celebration. Sudeley's great banquet hall echoed with parties, music, dancing, and laughter. Then tragedy struck. Gloom silenced the castle. Catherine gave birth to a baby girl named Mary, but a week later Catherine died from a fever. Mother and infant daughter were forever separated. But the tragedy did not end there. With Catherine barely dead, Thomas Seymour abandoned his newborn daughter and headed for London. Thomas Seymour went straight to Princess Elizabeth's bedroom and proposed to her for the second time. And the 15-year-old had the good sense to turn him down again. Undeterred, off he went and asked her half-sister Mary. She too turned him down. Thomas Seymour's lust for power in the end was to prove his undoing. Indeed, he was beheaded for treason. And when he died, Princess Elizabeth wrote, "This day died a man of much wit and very little judgment." Catherine was buried in the chapel at Sudeley in 1550. During civil war a century later, the chapel was ransacked. Her casket disappeared. 140 years later, a local farmer digging in the grounds came across a casket sealed in lead. He forced it open, and what he saw astonished him. The body of a woman, perfectly preserved, her complexion still milky white, her hair auburn. But within seconds the corpse started to wither and turn to dust, and the terrified man hastily reburied the casket. It wasn't until a century later, when this new chapel was built, that Catherine Parr was finally entombed in a manner befitting a Queen of England. Apparently, Catherine Parr's spirit was not to rest. Margaret Parker, who's worked here at the castle for 23 years, is the latest witness to the Queen's return.
Must be about 9 years ago. In the middle of winter, the castle was all locked up, and it was just 5 girls and myself cleaning. And it was an artist upstairs in Catherine Parr's room painting.
Knowing the woman artist was about, Margaret Parker wasn't surprised when she saw a figure standing in the window.
Morning.
But the artist had only just come down from the nursery. Did she frighten you?
No. I don't think the dead can hurt you, can it?
Unlike some ghosts, the former queen is a melancholy spirit who keeps to herself. But for those who live and work here, she's become a friend.
Night-night, Katie.
After Catherine's death, her daughter Mary mysteriously disappeared from history. No one knows what became of the unfortunate little orphan. Four centuries later, are these two tragic souls seeking reunion?
Spooks, phantoms, poltergeists. Some seek them out. Most seek to be protected from them, as evidenced in this early Cornish prayer. Dear Lord, protect us from ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties and things that go bump in the night. Good evening, I'm James Doohan. They've been called ghost stories, legends, myths, and total inventions of an overworked imagination. Whatever they are, tonight we will explore them all. So sit tight and keep a candle burning as we crawl from the safety of a warm bed, slide the bolt, and swing open the door. Tonight we will track, unearth, and embrace those things that go bump in the night. Talk to anybody and just whisper the word ghost. In seconds, you'll be immersed in a tale of unexplainable occurrence, one that appears to completely defy rational explanation. Everybody, everywhere, has a ghost story. Alberta's Rocky Mountains, as beautiful as they are mysterious. In 1885, the Government of Canada set aside just over 2,500 square miles in the heart of this pristine wilderness, creating Canada's first national park.
Sir John A. Macdonald, who piloted the bill through Parliament to establish the park, saw it as a spa along European lines where the wealthy would come to spend periods of time to take the waters, to relax and enjoy the scenery and the surrounding area.
Each year, the park enjoyed more and more visitors, and it wasn't long before the Canadian Pacific Railroad built the 843-room Banff Springs Hotel. By 1928, it was recognized as one of the world's best. Its reputation built on fine foods, lavish accommodations, and impeccable service. Its guest list from many of its many generations reads like who's who.
Earlier in the century, royalty were the epitome of stardom. The King of Siam in the early 1920s was thought to be a very famous person. People who were famous in the music world, people like Benny Goodman and radio, Jack Benny. And of course, movie stars have always been in this area. Many movies have been made here. Many famous movie stars have visited here, right up to Marilyn Monroe, who made some movies in this area, Alan Ladd, people of their vintage, and right up to Clint Eastwood and so on, people like that in the current day. For each period of time, the people who were famous at that time did come to Banff, and they still do.
Over its nearly 100-year history, the Banff Springs Hotel has enjoyed catering to the high life, and sometimes, as legend has it, to the afterlife. Along these majestic halls float stories as timeless and haunting as the hotel itself. One of the most intriguing is that of Sam Macaulay, affectionately known as the helpful bellman.
Sam was a bit of a character. He was a people person. He always was clowning. He was entertaining people. He had white hair. He had a Scottish accent, and he was always in the public spaces, greeting the guests, and a very jovial and happy person when he was working.
Not content to serve the hotel's population only in life, it is said that Sam continues to serve the guests of this great hotel 40 years after his death.
Before his death, he vowed that he would come back and haunt the hotel. And of course, the staff that knew him just chuckled and laughed.
One evening, a new bellman worked the hotel desk alone for the first time. He was feeling a little overwhelmed, doing his very best to accommodate each new request.
Go bellman. Yes.
Two ladies who were waiting on the 9th floor, they tried to access their room with their key, and it wasn't working, and that called for a night lock, and the nightman was very busy, and he mentioned that he apologized, but he'd be up there as soon as possible.
Minutes later, an elderly gentleman came to the aid of the two women.
Hi, you've been calling for a bellman. We can't get into our room.
I have a key with me.
Okay, that's great.
There you are, lady.
Thank you very much.
Then he quickly went on his way. Later, when the young bellman made his way to the women's room, he found them already comfortably inside and was informed that the other bellman had helped them.
Good evening, miss.
Good evening.
Oh, I see that you're all settled in.
Yes.
How did you get in?
An older gentleman let us in.
After recounting the story to his supervisor, the young bellman was informed that the only person that fit that description was Sam. To this day, employees of the hotel say that Sam continues to help anyone in need, guest and staff alike.
We work graveyards. We all take turns. And when you're walking, the hotel's very quiet. And when you're walking down the hall, a lot of times the elevator opens up for you. You go inside, floors pushed that you want to go to. And it happens so many times. It's pretty strange. I just don't know.
Another mysterious tale from the spring's hallowed halls involves a beautiful bride, a winding staircase, and a tragic accident, now known forever as the legend of the burning bride. It was the perfect day for the perfect spring wedding, set in the most magnificent surroundings.
The incident that took place there in the early 30s of the daughter, and it was the only daughter of a very prominent family in Calgary, and the parents of this young lady were personal friends of the then manager of the Banff Springs Hotel.
A lavish affair in the true 1930s style. Calgary's social elite had gathered to celebrate.
The day arrived, day something like today, early June bride, many people, and the ceremony was to take place in the oval room overlooking the Bow Valley.
Following the nuptials, the wedding's reception was to be held in the Rob Roy dining room, one floor below. But this happy occasion was to have a quick and tragic end. As the young bride descended the candlelit staircase, she lost her footing. As she fell, the flames of the candles caught the hem of her wedding gown. Before her terrified new husband and hundreds of horror-stricken wedding guests, she met her tragic end.
But it was a very, very tragic day in the life of the family, and a very, very tragic day for the hotel.
Afterwards, the hotel manager, vowing that no one would ever suffer such a tragedy again, had the great stone staircase sealed forever.
Today, 60 years later, that staircase is still closed.
Exactly 1 year later to the day, a hotel staff member reported seeing an iridescent phantom, a woman dressed in white, dancing the wedding waltz that death had so spitefully stolen.
The story of a family with an unwanted guest. In fact, a ghostly guest. A grandfather who refuses to go away. The family is not scared of him, but friends of the family certainly are. Just an average house in an average suburb. Well, that's the way it looks from the outside.
Hello. How are you?
But Jennifer Mills Coppin is convinced it's haunted. And so is her mother, Jean. When Jennifer was 3 years old, she lost her father to a tragic illness. And a few months later, her grandfather died. But Jennifer and her family hadn't seen or heard the last of Popper. She and her mother still talk about the night a year after the old man's death. The night they moved Popper's favourite chair into their bedroom.
I woke up in the early hours of the morning, wide awake, and I looked over in the corner. My grandfather was sitting there.
There's Poppy in the chair. When I sort of opened my eyes wider, I could see that it was a man dressed in a double-breasted suit and a hat. I couldn't see his face. That was very dark. I kept looking, and eventually it faded. It seemed to fade. It sort of was very obvious for a while, and then it faded. It seemed to, like, as if disappear.
This late-night encounter was disturbing enough, but soon that grandfather's restless spirit, or some other entity, began to make its presence felt in more disruptive ways.
My family was sitting down to dinner at the dinner table with a number of guests, and as we were sort of talking and eating, our cuckoo clock jumped off the wall. And I used the word jumped advisedly because it didn't fall, it used to jump. 3 months later.
Fred is an old friend of the Mills Coppin family, but that friendship was stretched a bit when they started telling him their ghost stories. And by then, they had even more witnesses, including a couple of boyfriends who'd been scared off by things that went bump in the night. Fred, though, maintained his healthy skepticism until...
I'd been working in the garden, and when I finished, I wanted to go and have a shower, so I went into the bedroom, left the door open. I became aware of some movement out of the corner of my eyes. I looked around. There was a finger drawing the door closed. I saw the door closing. Nobody did it. So that sort of opened my mind.
Clocks flying off walls, ghosts digging in the garden, spirits shutting doors. Interesting stuff. But what happened next is even more interesting. It raises the intriguing possibility that what humans do in this world can influence activities in some other realm.
I had a really bad argument with my mother. I stormed out into the backyard and went down to the back garden and was throwing dirt at the fence, convinced that the world was against me.
The tantrum was short-lived, and life in the Mills Coppin household returned to normal. Well, for a few hours anyway.
Make it stop! Make it stop! Please! It'll go away. What is it? I don't want it. Of all the things that have happened in this house, the night that the dirt was hitting the windows was the most frightening.
You could look down the yard and you could see the dirt coming, but there was nobody there.
That noise, I hate that noise. And I don't know to this day what it was. And I can't come to terms with that. And I never will until somebody explains it to me.
The Mills Coppin family, at least 3 or 4 boyfriends, half a dozen dinner guests, and a few friends of the family. They all witnessed ghostly goings-on here in this ordinary suburban home. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Alright, you're not gonna believe this. I got it on video now. I put the iPad in the window and now this thing's coming up to the steps in my backyard, Mike. Just
sure it's not somebody you should call the police?
Yeah, no, it's a demonic creature. It's not human.
Peace and comfort, Lord, that he knows that Lord, that you are watching over, Lord. You are his rear guard, and nothing's going to call me. When you lay down at night, no sudden terror will come upon you.
Oh my God, there it is, Mike. It came back. Oh my gosh.
I command you to go in Jesus' name.
This thing is looking weird. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. It knows something's going on, man. This thing is. Oh my gosh. Oh my. Oh my gosh, I don't know what happened. We got disconnected.
Pédophile de Lyon.
Mais pourquoi t'as laissé tomber la torche?
Pour éclairer, putain. Attends, je vais me fumer sa mère.
Non mais arrêtez, ça y est, vous me faites, putain!
Bolton, on the other hand, loved to fly.
Some of the men didn't like to fly, so in order for them to get their 50% flight skins, as we call it, extra money for flying hazardous duty, they had to have 4 hours a month of flight time on record. My thing was to fly under somebody else's name whenever I could get away with it for whatever reason was convenient. They had to go on liberty or they needed their 4 hours or whatever.
You flew this morning. You know the regulations.
Years later, Bolton returned to the old air base where he had come within a footstep of losing his life.
That afternoon in December, I went out after lunch to fly again in the afternoon. As luck would have it, and that's certainly the word, the duty officer was the same man who had been there in the morning when I had already flown. Since that happening, I've had some thoughts on that subject. One thing I've thought is that my family, which already existed, I had one child in Seattle that I had never seen yet. It might have been my entire family had I made that Flight 19, and who knows what else would have been different if I'd have flown as the 15th person with that training squadron.
leader of the training squadron was Marine Lieutenant Charles Taylor of Corpus Christi, Texas. He was a 6-year veteran with over 2,500 hours in the air, but he was a new man at Fort Lauderdale. He's late, but he's not in any hurry, which is unusual for Taylor, who has a record as a punctual and conscientious pilot. As his crew gathers, a few bets are laid on the pro football final between the Redskins and the Rams. No one will collect. 13 men will go up with Taylor in 5 Avenger aircraft. They are 1 man short. Corporal Alan Cosner has been excused and Eagle Bulletin has been grounded. They're kept waiting 30 minutes.
No.
Lieutenant Taylor is trying to get excused from the flight. When asked why, he can't quite explain it. He just feels he shouldn't go.
Forget it.
Please taxi to runway and hold position.
FT-28, your flight 19 is clear for takeoff at 14:10 hours.
2:10 p.m. They are 40 minutes late getting underway, but they will still be home before dark.
They should be about to head north.
The senior instructor from Lauderdale, Lieutenant Robert Cox, has just taken off on another mission. Cox is about to become the most important man in the lives of the 14 airmen of Flight 19. For the next 45 critical minutes, he will be their only contact with the outside world.
Powers, what does your compass read?
Repeat to Powers, what does your compass read? I don't know where we are. I'm afraid we got lost after that last turn.
This is FT-740 NES Fort Lauderdale.
Somebody up here, some boats or planes seem to be lost.
This is Fort Lauderdale to FT-74. Roger and acknowledge.
This is FT-74 to boat or planes calling Powers. Please identify yourselves so we can send some help.
This is FT-28.
Does anyone have any suggestions?
FT-28, this is FT-74. What is the problem?
Both my compasses are out. I am trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
I am over land, but it is broken. I'm sure it's the Keys,
But I have no idea how far out I am. Taylor seems to think he's over the Keys.
That is not possible. Please instruct FT-28 to fly standard procedure. 270 degrees and fly toward the sun.
FT-28, this is FT-74. Put the sun on your port wing, and if you're in the Keys, fly up the coast. What is your present altitude? I'll fly south to meet you.
I know where I am now. I'm at 2,300 feet. Don't come after me.
Roger, 2,300 feet. I'm coming up to meet you anyway.
Can you have Miami or someone turn on their radar gear and pick us up? We are on a navigational hop, and on the second leg, I took over as I thought we were lost.
Unfortunately, both of my compasses are not working. Over.
You can't expect to get here in 10 minutes. There's a 30 to 36 knot head or crosswind in your area. Turn on your emergency IFF gear. Or do you have it on already?
That is negative.
Use your ZBX gear. Use your ZBX gear.
FT-74, this is Fort Lauderdale.
Tell FT-28 to have one of his wingmen take over the lead.
FT-28, this is FT-74. Have one of your wingmen take over the lead. FT-28, your transmission is fading. Something seems to be wrong. What is your present altitude?
I'm at 4,500 feet. Visibility 10 to 12 miles. As the word spread at Lauderdale Base, there was dismay. How could a man with Taylor's experience get lost on such a simple exercise, on such a clear day, even if his compasses had gone out? It was December, almost Christmas. The days were short, and the sun was definitely in the west.
This is FT-74. Do you read me? This is FT-74. Do you read me? I've lost contact. I'm coming in to land.
Cox wanted to go back up, but permission was refused. He had played out his part in the drama, and to this day it still ranks as one of the most frustrating experiences of his life.
The leader of Flight 19 admitted that he was lost. He at no time indicated he had any other difficulties, except that he believed that his compasses didn't work properly. He asked for assistance in returning to Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station. And for some 45 minutes, I gave him this assistance by radio. He either ignored or refused the help that was being given him.
Port Everglades to FT-28. If you can change to yellow band 3,000 kilocycle emergency frequency, please do so and give us a call.
I cannot switch frequencies. I must keep my planes intact.
Port Everglades to FT-28. Radio check.
Can you read us? Affirmative. We have just passed over a small island. There is no other land in sight. I'm at 3,500 feet. Have on emergency IFF. Does anyone in the area have a radar screen that can pick us up?
Roger, stand by.
Buenas noches, señoras y señoras. Esta noche escuchamos a la música tu...
Got to get him off this channel. We're picking up Havana Commercial Radio.
Dinner key to all Naval and Coast Guard.
All efforts to get Taylor or anyone in Flight 19 onto the regular emergency channel were refused or ignored.
We have 5 aircraft in some difficulty and presumably lost.
To all Gulf Sea Frontier and Eastern Frontier, HFDF nets. Please be on the alert to obtain all possible bearings on FT-28, who is transmitting on 4805 kilocycles.
We are heading 030 for 45 minutes and then turning north to make sure we are not over the Gulf of Mexico. Over.
Port Everglades to Dinner Key.
Are you able to get a bearing on FT-28?
Dinner key to Port Everglades.
Using radio direction finders, homing in on Taylor's signal, 6 coastal stations were trying to combine and complete a radio fix on Taylor's position.
This is FT-28 to Flight 19. Change course to 090 for 10 minutes.
It was later determined that when Taylor had first reported himself lost, he was in fact right on course. By now, however, he was hopelessly confused.
Port Everglades, this is FT-28. Do you read?
I
weak. We are now heading 270.
Roger, FT-28.
This is FT-28 to Port Everglades. We will fly 270 until we hit the beach or run out of gas. Okay, when the first man gets down to 10 gallons of gas, we will all go down together. Does everyone understand? FT-28 to Port Everglades. Can you read me? Over.
Tier 22, turn right at
Port Everglades to FT-28. Hear you, shrink 3, modulation good.
At 5:45 p.m., it was dark in Florida. Search aircraft along the coast were on full alert. At Banana River, a flying boat was standing by. The crew didn't know why.
Port Everglades to FT-28. Can you change to 3,000 kilocycles? Repeat. Can you change to 3,000 kilocycles?
At 5:55 p.m., two-way radio contact Taylor was gone. 5 radio centers now had a bearing on Flight 19. They were waiting for Dinner Key, Miami.
This is Radio Dinner Key. We've got a good DF bearing of 023 degrees. True from this station. Does that complete the fix?
That completes it.
Roger.
Fix is 29 degrees, 15 north, 79 degrees west.
Roger and out. Okay, we found him. Let's bring him home, gentlemen. We've got a fix within a 100-mile electronic radius. 29 degrees, 15 minutes north, 79 degrees, 0 minutes west. That's a fix.
FT-28. FT-28. This is Port Everglades. This is Port Everglades. Do you read me, FT-28?
FT-28.
Compasses had gone, a man's mind had gone,
FT-28.
and now, just as they had found him, radio contact was lost.
Do you read me?
Something in the night was terribly wrong. 13 more men were about to be drawn into it. At 7:20 p.m., the crew at Banana River finally got word to join in the search. The flying boats were called flying gas tanks because that's what they were. It was part of the pre-flight check to make certain that none of the 13-man crew had matches or cigarettes.
Roger, Banana River and out. PB5 airborne from Banana River.
This is Dinner Key. Informed Banana River has now sent up 2 PBMs to conduct expanding square search.
Taylor to Powers, do you read?
By now, the entire Florida coast was listening to a man die.
We are over. Do you think?
Should be able to see a light.
Do you read me? FT-28. Do you read me?
The Banana River flying boat was the last hope. She reported in 3 minutes after takeoff. She was not heard from again. It was later realized that these men too had vanished in total silence, while the last sad fragments from Flight 19 were still being heard.
Holding 270 degrees. We did not go far enough east. Turn around again. We just as may as well turn around and go east again.
FT-28, FT-28. This is NSO, NSO. How do you read me? Over. It's 8:05. That should finish the fuel supply. It must be down.
Despite a monumental search, not a trace of the 6 aircraft and 27 men was ever found. How could a man of Taylor's experience become so disoriented in an area he knew like the back of his hand? How could the compasses on all 5 aircraft cease to function simultaneously? And if this was not the case, why did not Taylor give over command to another pilot? If Taylor had a premonition, he was right. It's hard to avoid the conclusion that there was something electric in the air that day. It may have been affecting compasses. It was certainly affecting the human mind. It worked swiftly.
The area that you are
It
discussing
seems to have
now
totally destroyed
is
a
the
fine
aura
pilot's
of this
judgment.
planet. It is the communicative channel through which the Millionth Council governs this planet.
Which council, sir?
The Millionth Council.
The millionth?
Millionth. Disappear, but they are in the timeless void. You're all perfectly alive and well. It is the only area through which the council can communicate.
December 1872.
Ship on the starboard bow!
The captain of the brigantine Dei Gratia sights a ship in the Atlantic, 800 miles off the Portuguese coast. It appears to be unmanned and steering wild.
Ahoy there! Captain Briggs! Ahoy! Anyone aboard?
The only reply is an eerie creaking. No one appears on deck. The ship is completely forsaken. What happened to the crew of the Mary Celeste is one of the enduring mysteries of the sea.
We represent the government of the United States of America. We have permission from your government to board your vessel.
Today, Coast Guardsmen are accustomed to finding abandoned vessels. The first boarding is tense and dangerous.
Nosotros tenemos el permiso de su gobierno a abordar su barco.
Modern abandoned ships usually mean only one thing. They're being used for illegal drug traffic. In the days of the great sailing vessels, however, derelict ships were not so easily explained, and no abandoned vessel has remained as mysterious as the Mary Celeste. Theories abound as to why the Mary Celeste was abandoned. It might have been the result of a prearranged salvage fraud, pirates, mutiny, a burst of deadly marine gas, or even a homicidal maniac, killing the rest of the crew, one by one, dumping their bodies, and then committing suicide. To try to unravel the web of intrigue surrounding the Mary Celeste, we must examine a reenactment of that fateful voyage in the winter of 1872. On November 2nd, in the New York harbor, the Mary Celeste completed loading her cargo, 1,700 barrels of alcohol. During the loading, 2 of the kegs slipped, damaging the longboat so severely it was put ashore as useless. A replacement could not be found, but the Mary Celeste still carried her yawl on deck. If absolutely necessary, It could accommodate the entire ship's company. The master, Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, brought his wife Sarah and 2-year-old daughter Sophia on board for the voyage. In his final letter to his mother, he wrote,
"It seems real home-like since Sarah and Sophia got here, and we enjoy our little quarters. Sophia has got over the bad cold she had when she came, and has a first-class appetite for hash and bread and butter. I think the voyage will do her lots of good. Our vessel is in beautiful trim, and I hope we shall have a fine passage."
To this, Sarah added,
"Benjamin thinks we've got a pretty peaceable crew this time, all round, if they continue as they have begun."
The night before the Mary Celeste sailed, Captain Briggs dined with Captain David Reed Morehouse of the Dei Gratia.
This makes a change in this day and age, really.
The two ships were moored side by side at the dock.
Very slipshod about it all.
In light of subsequent events, this was a strange coincidence. The two men knew each other well. What did Captain Morehouse think of Briggs?
Briggs was a teetotaler and a God-fearing man. He could be stern when occasion required it, and was not a man to be intimidated or imposed upon. But he was just and considerate towards the men serving under him, just as he was gentle and affectionate in his family relations. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4.
On November 5th, 1872, the Mary Celeste set sail. One month later, she was sighted by the Dei Gratia. The Mary Celeste was drifting, unmanned, 800 miles off the Portuguese coast. She would be sailed by a skeleton crew from the Dei Gratia to Gibraltar, where the official inquiry was held. At the British Admiralty Court, the proceedings opened with Captain Morehouse's description of his first sighting of the Mary Celeste.
I reckon the way the yards were square, she was running before the wind when she was abandoned. It's possible the storm that we met at 4 o'clock that morning might have sent her round had she also met it. First time I saw her, 2 o'clock afternoon, her head was westward. The jib was trimmed on the port side, although she was on a starboard tack. She was yawing, and coming up to the wind then, falling off. I judged something was amiss. I thought I saw a flag of distress at her yard, but subsequently it turned out to be a flapping sail. By 3 o'clock, we were about 350 yards off. I hailed her, but got no reply, and I couldn't see anyone on deck. So I sent Mr. Devereux, my second mate, over to board her, and in due course he signaled me to come over myself. When I got on board, Mr. Devereux had already sounded the pumps, which showed she made little or no water.
During the next hour, Captain Morehouse would carefully inspect every inch of the ship.
The ship was perfectly sound. Her hull, masts, and yards were in good condition. Her cargo, which was barrels of alcohol, was properly stowed and hadn't shifted, but the forehatch had been lifted off.
This was only one of the many enigmas Morehouse would encounter.
I came to the conclusion that she'd been left in a panic. The mainsail was lying loose, as if it had been run down. The lazarette hatch was also off, but there were plenty of provisions and water in there.
Anybody below?
The glass on the compass was smashed.
Compass glass is smashed.
Together, we searched the ship from stem to stern. At first, we were worried that she was a fever ship and the crew had died of cholera, but there wasn't a soul on board, nor were there any visible signs of there having been any trouble. In the forecastle, Oilskins, boots, and pipes were scattered about as if abandoned in great haste, and among the dunnage were articles of value you might have supposed their owners would have taken if abandoning ship. In the galley, everything was in good order, as it would be between meals. There was no wine, beer, or spirits on board. A child's clothing and toys were strewn about, and on the table was a sewing machine with a baby's pinafore on it and a number of small items lying on the table alongside. There were books and charts, but the chronometers and the ship's log were missing. The slate log had an unfinished letter beginning Fanny, my dear wife, Francis N.R., which I took to be the start of a message scribbled by the mate. The ship's boat was missing. You could see where the boat had been lashed across the main hatch, but that was not the right place for her. There were no signs of any tackle to launch her, but we usually launched our boat from the rail with only a tow rope to secure her. I saw no remains of painter or boat's rope fastened to the rail.
Captain Morehouse's observations were detailed, but they raised more questions than they answered. The man responsible for the official inquiry was Mr. Solly Flood, Her Majesty's Advocate General, Proctor for the Queen in her Office of Admiralty, and a legal bloodhound. A new age of belief in science, invention, and technology was dawning. The ability to seek and find cold, hard evidence in order to solve any mystery was reaching a golden era. Was there any evidence to indicate foul play? The only facts available so far, a ship in good order, yet abandoned in a hurry. The investigation about to take place in Gibraltar would propel the Mary Celeste to her place as the most infamous abandoned ship in the history of the sea. Advocate General Solly Flood boarded the Mary Celeste to examine it in minute detail.
There was no appearance of fire or explosion or any other assignable cause of abandonment. She was well provisioned and it seems had encountered no seriously heavy weather. She was thoroughly sound, staunch, and strong, and in every way seaworthy and well found. But both bows had been recently cut by a sharp instrument. On the starboard topgallant rail, there were marks apparently of blood and a mark of a blow, apparently by a sharp axe. A sword appeared to me to exhibit traces of blood and to have been wiped before being returned to its scabbard. In the forehatch, a barrel, ostensibly of alcohol, appeared to have been tampered with. My object is to move the Board of Trade to take such action as they may think fit, to discover, if possible, the fate of the master, whose name was Briggs, his wife and child, and the crew of the derelict. My own theory, or guess, is that the crew got at the alcohol and in the fury of drunkenness murdered the master and his wife and child and the chief mate, that they then damaged the bows of the vessel so as to give it the appearance of having struck on some rocks or suffered some collision, with a view to inducing the master of any vessel which might pick them up if they saw her at some distance, not to think her worth attempting to save, and that they did sometime between the 25th of November and the 5th of December escape on board some vessel bound for some South or North American port or the West Indies.
Was this the real story? Mutiny and murder? The Advocate General was convinced he was on the trail of a sensational crime. Soon, the story spread to the newspapers of the world and began to read like a modern detective yarn. As the inquiry proceeded, however, it became increasingly evident that the Advocate General had let his imagination run wild. Blood was later found to be wrong on almost every statement he made. The forensic tests proved that the sinister, bloody sword was really an old bayonet used to mix paints, and the blood on the rail was only rust. The final results of the inquiry cleared Captain Morehouse and the Dei Gratia crew of piracy, and in fact, the Dei Gratia was awarded a portion of the salvage value. There, the story might have ended, but for an amazing discovery 30 years later. A young apprentice sailor was sent ashore to collect some sand at St. Paul's Rocks, a tiny island in the middle of the South Atlantic. He found a skeleton propped in the shade of a rock. Beside it, a bottle stuffed with a soiled and faded letter. A letter which told an amazing tale.
My ship struck these rocks at dawn 3 days ago. She sank immediately. Only I, of all her crew, reached the shore alive. I am dying of thirst. It has been a voyage of disaster. 3 deaths in 2 days. Then came the poison on the 7th day out. Ship helpless, and so for 3 days we lay. Knew we must ask assistance to take us to Gibraltar for crew. Early morning sighted small brig becalmed. Mate said, "Take her crew." Went aboard. Captain asked why we came. His wife and child were with him. We left no one on board. The brig was called Mary Celeste.
Years later, this tragic letter was brought to public attention in the London Daily Express. Was this at last the real clue to the mystery of the Mary Celeste? If so, why did the young sailor wait 9 years to publish the letter? Many people doubt its authenticity. It is just one of the hundreds of theories proposed during the last century. There is a universal sailor's superstition about ships born unlucky. And the Mary Celeste lived up to that superstition. From all the evidence collected, In Search Of proposes a logical explanation. The Mary Celeste had been at sea for 8 days. The hatches had remained closed because at first the weather was stormy. Gradually, though, the cold November chill of New York gave way to the milder latitudes of the Azores. The cargo of alcohol was stored in barrels made of red oak, an extremely porous wood. At least 8 of the barrels leaked badly during the voyage. Battened down under the hatches, the fumes mingled with the foul air of the hold. Was a potentially explosive mixture of gas forming? Off the Azores, the wind dropped to a gentle breeze. Taking advantage of the calm weather, Briggs probably ordered the ventilation of the hold, which may have set off a fateful chain of events. An upward rush of fumes, perhaps even an explosion. Then, steam, looking like smoke, poured out of the hatch.
Abandon ship!
Some of the men began to take in sail. Convinced that the ship was about to blow up, Briggs ordered the boat lowered. A sailor broke out a coil of rope as a tow line from the lazarette. Someone grabbed some tins of preserved meat. Briggs snatched up his chronometer and any of the ship's papers he could quickly lay his hands on. Feeling certain that time was of the essence, he urgently herded his family and crew to the yawl. According to meteorological reports, a sudden squall blew up that day. Under the impact of a violent gust, the vessel may have lunged forward with a suddenness and force which broke the improvised tow line. They may have tried to row after the Mary Celeste, or they may have turned toward the island of Santa Maria, a jagged, inhospitable coastline where a small boat and her occupants would easily be smashed to pieces in the surf. The wind shifted, however, so it seems more probable that the small boat was blown southeast, away from the island and out into the vast reaches of the Atlantic, to disappear forever. When the Mary Celeste was found on December 5th, the last entry on her log slate was for the morning of November 25th, 11 days earlier. This entry put the Mary Celeste 6 miles north of the island of Santa Maria in the Azores. With the set of her sails, and with no one at her helm, her natural course would be roughly at right angles to the wind. This presumably was how, over the 10 days, she covered the 750 miles between the last entry in the log and the position where she was first sighted by the Dei Grati. What has been reenacted seems to be the most likely explanation. But whatever the cause of the panic, Captain Morehouse was certain of one thing.
Captain Briggs bore the highest character for seamanship and correctness, and would not, I think, desert his ship except to save his life.
The Mary Celeste became a marked ship. Sailors being superstitious, no one wanted to own her, sail her, or have anything to do with her. She was sold and resold rapidly at well below her commercial value. 13 years after the events we have described, she was deliberately wrecked by her owners in a failed insurance fraud scheme. On Rochelle's Reef off Haiti, she quickly broke up. And today, there is no more trace of her than there is of Captain Briggs and his crew of that fateful voyage of 1872.